Welcome to Living Well with MS, the podcast from Overcoming MS for people with multiple sclerosis interested in making healthy lifestyle choices. I'm your host, Jeff Alex. Thank you for joining us for this new episode. I hope it makes you feel more informed and inspired about living a full life with MS. Don't forget to check out our show notes for more information and useful links. You can find these on our website at overcomingms.org/podcast. If you enjoy the show, please spread the word about us on your social media channels. That's the kind of viral effect we can all smile about. Finally, don't forget to subscribe to the show on your favourite podcast platform so you never miss an episode. Now, without further ado, on with the show. Today's episode is a catch-up of what's been happening in 2021 and how that affects people following the OMS protocols. Returning for this episode is Dr. Jonathan White, medical advisor and event facilitator for OMS. Before starting this episode, I should mention that people who suffer from severe allergic reactions should avoid the Pfizer vaccine, and it's always worth speaking to your healthcare provider before getting any medical treatment. So, Johnny, welcome back to the podcast.
Thank you very much, Jeff. Pleasure to be back again.
And we're starting off this season 2021, slightly different circumstances to previous ones. So I'd like to start by asking, what just happened in 2020? And could you put it in the context of the health and well-being perspective?
Just starting off with an easy question.
Yeah.
I think to do that succinctly is a really difficult task, to be honest. I mean, certainly for those of us living in the UK and Europe, parts of the US, we're still, to my mind, really in the eye of the storm of COVID, or it certainly feels that way. And I sometimes feel it's pretty hard to see the wood for the trees, to be honest, but in a sort of a soundbite way, I really consider this to be the single greatest global public health event in a century, or certainly since the end of the Second World War, and that wasn't technically disease at that stage. In most people's lifetimes, there just has not been as significant an event as this in terms of their impact on their daily living, their home life, working life, school, restrictions on where they can travel to, who they can socialise with, where and when, with whom they can exercise. And you couple that with massive economic impact on a global scale. Who knows how long it'll be before that comes round and recovers, and what the world will look like afterwards. And undoubtedly, unfortunately, many jobs and many businesses will simply not survive. In terms of just hard, terrible numbers, I had a look last week on the WHO site. Globally, there now have been 100 million reported cases of COVID-19, 2.1 million deaths. And in the UK last week, we passed the extremely grim milestone of 100,000 deaths. I mean, those numbers are just, you can't really compute those. And at the simplest but yet most tragic level, it's a story of just huge personal suffering and grief. You've loved ones lost, families torn apart, livelihoods destroyed. And sometimes those people aren't even able to be with their loved ones to say goodbye in their final moments or to even have a proper funeral service. And it's just awful. And that's my perspective on it, to be honest.
And so, specific to this podcast then, how do you think that COVID-19's impacted people with MS?
Yeah, well, as somebody within the MS community, for me, there's been a lot of fear, there's been anxiety, there's been times of huge uncertainty. For many of us, it's involved physical isolation, social isolation, and all of the negative impacts that come with that to our mental health, our physical health, and our sense of well-being. It's meant huge changes to our home life, our working lives, for those of us working. For lots of us, there have been changes to the way that our condition is managed by the medical community, by our neurologists, our MS nurses, and the allied health professionals. You might have missed appointments you've been waiting for. They might have been cancelled or rebooked and cancelled again, or changed location. Your MRI scan might have had to be delayed because it wasn't safe for you to go to the hospital. You may have been waiting to try a new treatment and perhaps an infusion medication, and now that has impacts on when or if you can get a vaccine. And remember as well, as the MS community in general would be considered by many health bodies to be a more vulnerable one for many clinical reasons, but also very vulnerable, to the virus, of course, itself in some people, but also vulnerable to the sense that, we're relying on services and many of them are simply not there in the same way at the minute. So there's been a huge impact for people with MS, without a doubt.
Yeah, when they say, so many people died, but 99% had underlying health conditions. It does bring it home when you think, I have one of those underlying health conditions. And I know so many people that do, and it's like we're not expecting to die in the next year. It's not like we're not on death's door. These people with underlying health conditions, some of them obviously will be on death's door, but I mean, a lot of them have got a condition which is just listed as an underlying health condition, and it could be that actually they're expecting to have a long, fulfilling life and live for many, many, many years.
Yeah, and at the minute it's been put on hold. But just to be clear, for the majority of people with MS, and we now have quite a lot of data about people with MS getting COVID, the majority of them will do very well and will recover. But there are risk factors, of course, within the MS community that would increase your risk of a poor outcome from COVID. And, they're the same as for many other people. So obesity, advancing age, increased levels of disability. We're now seeing increase your risk of mortality and morbidity from COVID. So yes, there are people within our community who are very vulnerable to COVID, and their lives are on hold, essentially, as many of ours are right now.
And so there've been some problems, let's say, in how the pandemic's been dealt with, specifically in the UK, US, and some other specific countries. Other countries have done very well. I mean, the likes of Australia, New Zealand, Vietnam's done very well. But the countries that have had these problems, like UK, US, France, so on, do you think that they've improved their approach? Have they righted the ship, if you like, and have improved the situation going forward?
Well, thankfully, I'm not a politician and nor am I an epidemiologist, but, I believe in the fullness of time and the inevitable public inquiries, they'll without doubt, they will show things that could and should have been done quicker, better, or differently. The UK, as an example, in my own opinion, I think we locked down too late last March, and probably again this time. We never really got a workable track and trace system that was fit for purpose. We have been too slow to respond often, and probably not responded strongly enough, certainly with regards to things like border controls, quarantining. So there are definitely, in my view, things that could have been done better. I think probably the success story, if there is one at the minute, and it's early days within the UK itself, would be the vaccine story. We've now had over 9 million people given their first dose, and some given their second dose, although there are different issues there with regards to timing. So I think that there are things that are getting better. I can't speak for lots of other countries, except to say that there are issues with some of them, and the supply and distribution of vaccine, which seems to be an issue. But listen, it's.
So do you think that 2021 will see a change? Do you think we came into 20? I just remember at the start of the year 2021. You think, well, thank goodness that 2020's over.
Yes.
A few days later, they stormed the Capitol in the US, and then I thought, okay, 2021's got some things up its sleeve as well.
There's a bite here,
yeah. But do you think 2021 will, in terms of the pandemic, COVID-19, will see a massive change, and as you mentioned, vaccination, and so by the end of 2021 we'll be in a dramatically better situation?
Well, it's not going to happen overnight. This is not going to be a magic fix, and people have sort of said, by the spring, as in March, April time, we'll be back to normal. I'm not sure that that's the case at all, really. But to be clear, in my view, vaccination is the way out of this unholy mess. The two greatest global medical successes in history at the public health level have been clean water and vaccinations. And I understand that some people out there do not share my view of the issue of vaccination, but I wholeheartedly believe it to be true nonetheless. The data is very clear that all available vaccines, and of course there are differences in different parts of the world, but they are extremely effective at reducing severe COVID infection. They significantly, massively reduce hospitalizations and death rates, and hopefully within the next few weeks we'll start to see data on those people being vaccinated having reduced transmission rates of the virus amongst vaccinated populations, and that's the unknown at the minute. When you've been given the vaccine, does that stop you passing on COVID? It seems that it would make sense that you would, but of course you need to prove that. So there's light at the end of the tunnel with regards to the vaccination program, and hopefully in other parts of the world that rolls out. There's also the fact that the medical treatments, if and when you do have COVID, are improving rapidly. A couple of examples would be the very cheap, widely prescribed steroid dexamethasone. We now know from a UK trial it has significant impacts, positive impacts for people with severe COVID. And their drugs are being repurposed, so like rheumatoid arthritis drugs like tocilizumab, which is a little bit similar to some of the MS drugs. We now know it and another one of its cousins, if you like, are showing really positive results in terms of outcomes for people who are in hospital with severe COVID infection. So there are lots of things, as with any new disease, there are things we are getting better and with. We're learning on looking after people when they are in hospital with COVID, and essentially to not tube or ventilate them as early as we thought we maybe had to at the start. So there are things that we are learning and we are advancing, and there is, without doubt, there is light at the end of this tunnel, but it's just that we're not quite at the end of the tunnel maybe just yet.
And so people who've got MS, is there risks specifically for them getting vaccinated?
Well, at present, a huge number of the global MS charities and the regulatory bodies working in MS are almost universally saying that anyone with MS should take any vaccine as soon as it's offered to them, regardless of type. The consensus at the minute is there's absolutely no reason that the vaccines should cause relapse or worsen your symptoms. And it's always worth remembering that COVID infection certainly could cause relapse and worsen your symptoms. And of course, the other thing to bear in mind is that we're learning that long COVID, this phenomenon of this sort of post-viral syndrome that some people are getting, probably that's about 10% of people after COVID infection, is remarkably similar to some of our MS symptoms in terms of cognitive functioning and fatigue and things. And to my mind, there's a very, very strong case for getting the vaccine in somebody who has MS. There will be other people who feel that is not a risk that they want to take. That's their decision. But I think that the risks are there are risks with anything that we do. Of course, the risks of vaccination are extremely small, and the risks of COVID, in my mind, outweigh them. Certainly if you are older, if you've had MS for a long time, if you have a greater level of disability, then personally speaking, vaccination is the way to go.
And so is there the differences between the vaccines? Do they work in different ways, and does that affect people with MS and specifically people with some of the treatments which are it's the stronger medications, if you like, that might affect their immune system? Should they try to get a particular type of vaccine or change their approach?
Yeah, so the advice is to take anyone you're offered, regardless of brand, MS type, age, level of disability, or whichever DMD you're on. That's the sort of headline take-home message. But obviously there are caveats to that, and so it needs to be under local guidance. And they're probably for people on the infusion medications, so I'm thinking things like alemtuzumab or ocrelizumab or natalizumab, there will be specifics regarding, for example, the timing of doses, how long you need to leave it before or after a dose before you would get the vaccine, for example. But and different jurisdictions have different guidance on that, but that guidance is there. But generally speaking, some of the more potent, if you like, infusion medications may blunt your vaccine response, but you will still very likely develop a significant vaccine response and derive benefit and protection from that. In terms of how the differences between the vaccines, if you like, there are a few different brands out there, but there are essentially two different ways in which they work. So one is mRNA technology, and the other is the viral vector technology. So if I start with viral vectors first, that's the sort of the old-fashioned, if you like, traditional way of developing a vaccine. You take a little piece of the virus or whatever it is you're trying to protect against, a little bit of its code, and you put it into then a harmless virus. So in the case of the AstraZeneca Oxford jab, it's a chimpanzee cold virus or an adenovirus, which has had a little bit of coronavirus injected into it, the COVID-19 virus injected into it, and then it's injected into the body, where the immune system recognises the vaccine as a foreign invader, and it mounts an immune response. So that's the way that many vaccines work, and that's not a live vaccine. So there are concerns with live vaccines in MS, but it's not a live vaccine, so you can have it in MS. The other is the mRNA technology, which is the one that everyone has been talking about, the new kid on the block, if you like. It's not really a new kid on the block, to put it in perspective. mRNA technology has been around for at least a decade in the treatment of cancers like malignant melanoma. It's very safe and it's very effective in that. And it's a very clever way of working. And if I explain it as simply as I can, because I'm not an immunologist, basically mRNA or messenger RNA is a variation of DNA, so the genetic code in all of our cells. And what you're doing with the COVID vaccines using mRNA is you take or you create a little piece of the code for COVID-19 and you inject it into our muscles, usually up in the arm. And the muscle cells themselves absorb that code and then and the code within the muscle creates essentially the little piece of what we call antigen, or the bit that your immune system recognises as coronavirus. So it's not coronavirus, but the body recognises this antigen code as coronavirus, and it then makes the antibody response to it. And the advantage of the mRNA technology is it's very fast, so it's very, very quick to make. The viral vector ones usually take a lot longer. So it's very quick to make, it's cheap to make, relatively speaking. It's a very effective way of mounting an antibody response. And the other huge advantage it has is that it's relatively easy to slot in different bits of code. So for example, should they need to change the vaccine for a new strain or variant, you can slice out bits of code and put in other bits of code relatively easily, and that's a huge advantage in a vaccination program, certainly when you want to vaccinate a huge global population against an endemic virus. So in simple terms, there's the two current differences.
But it wouldn't make a major difference, so you wouldn't say, well, I'll wait for vaccine X.
Absolutely not. So just I think it is worth elaborating on slightly, because I know that some people out there have raised concerns about the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine. So within the trial, there were 2 suspensions of the trial when patients in the vaccine group developed symptoms of transverse myelitis, which, as we know, can be a precursor to MS. Now, if you have 45,000 people in the trial, 2 people develop symptoms of transverse myelitis, and within the UK, the risk of MS is roughly about 1 in 5 to 600. Then both of those events could have happened purely because they were going to happen anyway, if that makes sense, because MS is common in the population. Both the trial was stopped, it was fully investigated, they were satisfied it was nothing to do with the vaccine, and the vaccine has been considered and should be considered safe in people with MS. And that's not me saying that. That's come from the Association of British Neurologists, the MS Society in the UK, many of the bodies around the world representing the MS community. So either technology should be considered safe for people with MS. Okay,
so as there's obviously a major vaccination push going on worldwide, and a remarkable proportion of the population already vaccinated, but most people are not. So people with MS, is there anything they should do to stay healthy while they're awaiting vaccination? Because obviously things have changed somewhat. We can't necessarily do all the sports we used to do, and our lifestyles have changed quite dramatically.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think for those of us new to the OMS program, dive in, get to it. For those of us who've been on for a while, please keep at it. If you take it sort of piece by piece, vitamin D and COVID, there's now prospective data. So going forward, in Spain, they've shown that giving people high doses of vitamin D when they at early stages of COVID infection prevented a large proportion being significantly unwell or going to ICU or dying. So vitamin D and COVID, no downside there. Keep taking your vitamin D. We know that nutrition undoubtedly plays a role in many, many diseases. COVID, I don't see being any exception to that. So eating well is protective for your physical health, but also eating well is massively protective for your mental health. We know that the gut communicates with the brain at an extremely effective level, and what we eat directly impacts on how we feel. And I think that's a huge part of this. There's the keeping ourselves as physically well as we can, doing all the things that we normally do from an MS point of view or an OMS point of view. But in terms of the mental health aspect, then this, we've got to turn to the mainstays of the program for me, and I know I certainly have done that, and it's helped me hugely throughout this. So, it's keeping up your regular meditation exercises. It's it's journaling. It's writing down the things that that sit there and may plague you in the middle of the night. It's getting it onto a piece of paper and out of your head. There are a multitude of resources on the OMS website. I saw it this morning. Dr. Rachel Hunter has a really nice blog on probably the processes and the benefits of reflection, with some really nice exercises in that. I saw a recent post about new breath meditations. There's Veronique's yoga post. There's all the recipes that are coming on rapidly. And of course, there's your wonderful podcast, Jeff, for all the latest info on the world of MS as well. So, yeah, turn to us. There's a lot on the OMS website and all of our platforms, but also there's the community. And don't forget that at its heart, the OMS program really is a community. It's it's your circle. It's and if you can't be physically with them, you can hopefully be remotely with them. And if you don't have a circle in your area, well then connect with us online. And there are lots of like-minded people all trying to get through this as best we all can.
Saying that, actually, just on the side, yeah. So the circle I'm a member of, one of the guys decided to, because of exercise being a little bit more problematic, he's worked out a mileage per hour of exercise you do a week, and he's adding together the amount the whole circle do, and we're doing a world tour. And so he's posting pictures of the cities, and he's got this route on Google Maps. And so actually our time of doing not normal exercise necessarily, and maybe more housebound and not getting out as we used to, it has changed into which city we're getting to next. And it gives us a bit of impetus to do a little bit more, because we'll get a few more miles and get somewhere nice. Yeah,
that's brilliant, isn't it? That's really, it's fun and it's different, and I think that's a fantastic idea. I like that.
Sorry, that's a bit off topic.
Yeah, for me, it's become lots of YouTube yoga and turbo trainers and all sorts of things like that. So yeah, I quite like to go on a virtual world tour myself,
rather than watching Joe Wicks all the time.
Absolutely.
So, has this affected research? Because obviously billions have been put into COVID vaccine research and other COVID research as well, because it's not just the vaccine, there's a lot of treatment research going on. So has that slowed MS research in any way?
I think it's probably quite hard to quantify at the minute, but undoubtedly there'll be inevitable knock-on effects throughout research in clinical medicine, not just MS, but not least in terms of recruiting people into clinical trials. There's lots of trials that have had to be paused. So, for example, the MS STAT2 trial, which is looking into statins and progressive MS. So that's had to pause recruitment temporarily, hopefully, just simply because it's not feasible for lots of reasons to bring people into hospital or to have the researchers doing that at the minute. So there's the recruitment side of things, but there's also, I suppose, the financial support for research from governments and the charitable sector, which has been hit massively, of course, by COVID. But so much MS, the positive is that so much MS research was ongoing and in advanced stages that I personally would be very hopeful that there's going to be new and exciting results in the coming months and years. And I don't believe that people with MS are going to lose out in the medium to longer term from this. I really don't.
And could there actually be any positives from the amount of investment that's gone into COVID-19 efforts? So actually, could there be some positives out of this for the wider medical community and MS specifically?
Well, yes, potentially. That knowledge is always power, and specifically, now it's very early, but there has been some data to show the mRNA technology that we talked about. There's been a study in mice that shows huge promise when mice were injected with a part of code that essentially tells the immune system to tolerate myelin again. So myelin's the fatty sheath around some nerves that the immune system is incorrectly and inappropriately attacking in MS, and that's what causes the symptoms. So if you can teach the immune system to tolerate myelin again and stop attacking it, that's a potentially massive thing. And in the mice, so the mice had EAE, which is the sort of mouse model of MS. It either stopped or reversed disability in those mice, which is pretty important result. And also really importantly, there was no evidence of systemic effect in the immune system. So many of the current disease-modifying treatments have side effects and knock-on effects for our normal functioning of our immune system. So if it leaves the rest of the immune system untouched, if you like, that's a fantastic thing. And it's also fast and cheap to make. And of course the study ends with, well, we need to study this in humans now, and of course they do, and of course it's 30 days, but that is a positive that has come out of all of the interest, I suppose, in mRNA technology. So that is a positive. So fingers crossed that will bear fruit for us all.
Yeah, mice always get the best MS treatments, it seems.
They do, but they are all literally the guinea pigs or the mice.
Yeah, and I'm sure. Yeah.
But yes, it is an exciting one. Yeah.
And there's talk about mutations because there's in the UK, as the two of us are, we've obviously got one of the problem strains of COVID at the moment, and there's also South Africa strains, and around the world different strains and mutations are coming. So are you concerned about potential mutations and that they could end up being a new super COVID-21 or something, and that could then blunt the effectiveness of a vaccine?
Well, so the first thing to say is it's completely expected that a virus will mutate. That's what viruses do. So it's not something specific to COVID-19 itself. Scientists, I think, have been very clear on this so far that coronavirus is not going away, and it is possible in the future that the vaccines may have to be altered to deal with a strain or a new variant. But at present, the data that we're seeing are largely encouraging about the effectiveness and protection level. So to put in perspective, the World Health Organization says a vaccine is effective if it reduces infection by around 50% or greater than 50%. And we've sort of seen 85 and 90%, 95% effectiveness from these vaccines. So they are very, very effective. There's been some new information within the last week or so regarding the South African and the South American variants that people are rightfully concerned about. And they seem to, the vaccines that are being given, and seem to offer protection of around 65% at the minute. So they are still effective. They're not as effective, but they are still effective against the COVID strains that are presently available. So that is reassuring. I think it's probably, given that the virus is likely to continue to mutate and it's going to be around the same way, think of it hopefully in the same way as flu annually, that there's a different strain each time and there's a slightly different flu shot for each flu season. And that hopefully, identifying a new strain early, adapting a vaccine if required, or ensuring that the population is vaccinated, will keep community cases low, transmission low, and that will stop the snowball, if you like, coming down the mountain and the avalanche that we've had in the last year. If you halt this in its tracks in the future, then hopefully we will not be having this discussion again in 2022, 2023.
So the flu vaccine, presumably they're not starting again each year. They don't. Would they be starting again from zero, or can they?
No. It's the way that the flu program usually works is that obviously Australia's winter comes before the northern hemisphere, so they look at what happens with flu in the winters down there, and they adapt our flu vaccine, if you like, in the northern hemisphere to that. So what you do is sort of you look at where it is now and currently. and then you adapt. But you would not be starting from zero. We don't have to throw out all that hard work. Absolutely not. As I said, particularly the mRNA vaccines are relatively easy and quick to adapt and to change to new strains or variants. And it may not be that needs to happen, but it can happen if it needs to. And remember, you'll have significant protection, hopefully, in lots of these countries when the vaccination program gets out to the population as a whole. That you'll have such a wide base of herd immunity, which is a phrase we hear a lot these days, along with things like social distancing and social bubbles and all sorts of things. But if there is immunity in the community at large, then in simple terms, the virus can't take hold in the same way that it did before. Because last year, nobody had any immunity to COVID whatsoever. It was an entirely new virus, so we're not starting from scratch. Absolutely not.
And just to wrap up, on a more positive note, what are you most hopeful about for 2021?
Well, I'm really looking forward to hopefully seeing my family and my friends again. I'm really looking forward to being able to hug people. Strangely, I didn't think I was a hugger, but I obviously am. I'm very excited about a pint of cold Guinness whilst watching a rugby match in my local pub. It feels like forever since that happened. And even maybe, heaven forbid, being able to go on a trip with my family. Professionally, I want to continue to grow and develop our local early pregnancy and pregnancy law services in my real day job. And of course, I'm very, very excited by all the new and exciting OMS developments and initiatives that we have. So throughout this year, so please continue to watch this space. And actually, Jeff, if you wouldn't mind indulging me, if that's okay, I just wanted to share with your listeners a poem that I saw this week that I think sort of sums up how I feel about this. It doesn't specifically refer to coronavirus, but I quite like to, as you know, I like a little quote, usually from a film, but this time I've got a poem. It's called Time to Be Slow, by an Irish poet called John O'Donoghue, who died in 2008. This is the time to be slow. Lie low to the wall until the bitter weather passes. Try, as best you can, not to let the wire brush of doubt scrape from your heart all sense of yourself and your hesitant light. If you remain generous, time will come good, and you will find your feet again on fresh pastures of promise, where the air will be kind and blushed with beginning. And I think that, for me, there is hope. There is light at the end of the tunnel. The night is always darkest before the dawn, and I certainly see little rays of sunlight coming up over the horizon. So until then, I hope that all your listeners can stay safe and well and look after themselves.
Thank you, and thank you for that poem. That was excellent. And I'm hoping that in a year's time we could have a wrap-up for 2021 which goes back to talking about more normal things.
That would be excellent, Jeff. I would like that a lot.
Thank you for joining us, Johnny.
Yeah, thank you very much, Jeff. Take care.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Living Well with MS. Please check out this episode's show notes at overcomingms.org/podcast. You'll find all sorts of useful links and bonus information there. Do you have questions about this episode or ideas about future ones? Email us at podcast@overcomingms.org. We'd love to hear from you. You can also subscribe to the show on your favourite podcast platform so you never miss an episode. Living Well with MS is kindly supported by a grant from the Happy Charitable Trust. If you'd like to support the Overcoming MS charity and help keep our podcast advertising free, you can donate online at overcomingms.org/donate. Thank you for your support. Living Well with MS is produced by Overcoming MS, the world's leading multiple sclerosis healthy lifestyle charity. We are here to help inform, support and empower everyone affected by MS. To find out more and subscribe to our e-newsletter, please visit our website at overcomingms.org. Thanks again for tuning in and see you next time.